Good evening, everybody. Welcome. My name is Sarah Wilson. You've joined us this evening for the Draft Georges River Local Environmental Plan 2020 webinar. We'll be focusing on the Foreshore Scenic Protection Area this evening. On your screens in front of you, you should be able to see the agenda for this evening's session. So we'll be running through a number of items and we'll have some Q&As at the end. You'll be able to hear about the LEP in general and the staged approach. We'll be looking at a comparison of existing foreshore controls and the FSPA proposed changes and an explanation. And there'll be also an opportunity to get your pre-submitted questions answered, as well as ask some questions during the session. And we'll finish off with some information about the next steps to finalising the LEP. So the purpose of this evening's webinar is to provide an overview of the Georges River LEP. You'll get some background on the rationale behind the proposed controls for the Foreshore Scenic Protection Area, and we'll address some of the key issues that were received in the submissions to date. We'll engage with yourselves through an open conversation, and we want to hear your questions and respond to your concerns. I would, though, firstly like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we stand on and the living culture of the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay tribute to the unique role they play in preserving, protecting, and promoting Aboriginal culture and heritage in this region. So this evening, as I said, we will attempt to answer your questions. You'll get an opportunity to put some questions into the chat as well, and you'll get your questions answered there. We have designed a presentation to try to address as many of your pre-submitted questions as we possibly can. So if you'd like to hold off asking questions until the end of the presentation, you may well find that at least some of your questions have been answered. And please also note that this evening's questions, while they certainly will be considered by Council, they won't be treated as formal submissions, and Council would encourage you to make your own formal submission as part of the public exhibition. So I'd also like to now introduce your team this evening from Council. We have a panel of presenters and people from the planning team. So Meryl Bishop will be presenting. Meryl is the Director of Environment and Planning here at Council. Catherine McMahon is the Manager of Strategic Planning. Stephanie Lum is the Coordinator of Strategic Planning. And Anne Quinn is a Strategic Planner and Urban Designer. And they're all here this evening to answer your questions. So without much further ado, I'd like to hand over to Meryl, who is going to give us a presentation and provide an overview of the Georges River LEP. Thank you, Meryl.
Thank you, Sarah. Now, this is actually Raquel. So Meryl will join us in just a moment. Now, I'll be your facilitator for this evening. I wanted to just take a quick moment to give you a little bit of information about the platform that we're meeting inside of today. We will have, as Sarah has mentioned, opportunities for question and answer toward the end of this evening, or the latter part of this evening's session. And when that time arrives, it'll be the time for us to start utilising some of the elements of the system. Now, firstly, I'll note for you that all participants are automatically muted, and I will note, please, that the session is being recorded. If you would like to ask a question, you have a few options with which you can present those questions to us. The first is to actually write your question. So if you click on the icon with a question mark on it, you'll have the opportunity to actually type in a question. You're welcome to do this at any time through the presentation. As Sarah said, we will take our questions at the end, but if for some reason there's something you'd like to just note throughout, you can write it there. At the end, when we do get to our open question session, you'll have the ability to raise your hand, and you do that by clicking on the hand button. That will then put you into a queue of raised hands, and we'll work our way through that as we go through our Q&A session. So I do remind you all that the session is being recorded, and I do encourage you that as Meryl is going through the content presentation for tonight, that if you do have any questions you'd like to put through into the written section, you're welcome to do so. Bear in mind, because we will focus our time on the audio questions, the questions you'll actually be asking, some of the written questions may not be answered tonight. But if you put them in there, then we can come back to you after the session if they aren't answered throughout the course of the evening. Okay, I will now hand over to Meryl.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. It is Meryl here. Look, just to begin the presentation, I thought it was probably worthwhile giving you some context of how we develop a local environmental plan and the framework in which we do it in. So when we develop a local environmental plan, there are things that we are required to look at in respect to the broader strategic documents that apply to Sydney and the district. So first being there, the Sydney Regional Plan, that is governed by the Greater Sydney Commission. The second is the South District Plan that has a set of recommendations relating to Georges River, Canterbury, Bankstown and Sutherland. And then the next step down from that is our own local strategic planning statement, which we developed through 2019 with great support and feedback from the community. Now, that local strategic planning statement was endorsed by the Greater Sydney Commission in February this year. Now, the LEP will also be supported. So again, in the sort of set of documents that help us plan and guide development in the city is a comprehensive and harmonised development control plan. And the other thing is a development contributions plan, which sort of outlines how we spend contributions to support development. So whether it's footpath, childcare centres, libraries, etc. Now, as I indicated, the local strategic planning statement had a number of recommendations, of which many of the recommendations would be implemented through that planning system through the LEP process. Now, the council endorsed that we undertake the implementation of the recommendations in a staged process. So the first stage being LEP 2020, which we're talking about, which is part of the subject of this evening's presentation, is about housing and harmonisation. So bringing the LEPs of the former councils together. It also looks at introducing a set of equity in the controls across the city, and it also looks at some housing investigation areas. The second LEP, which we will commence next year, relates to housing choice, so that issue around affordable housing. The third area also will begin next year but start to implement in 2022 is really focusing on our centres. So that is the jobs and activation and probably some of our industrial areas. And the fourth stage is, I guess, which is beyond 2025, is coming back and looking at where we're heading with housing and developing our housing targets of the 14,000 additional houses that are required by 2035. Okay, the aims of the LEP. I've already mentioned there, this is the LEP 2020. It is key focus is in harmonising the controls from the former Hurstville and Kogarah LEPs. Also is key there is to introduce a set of consistent controls across the city. It develops a hierarchy of residential zones, and we have introduced proposing to introduce a true medium density housing zone, being an R3 zone. It also, in the LEP, we're also introducing provisions to enhance and protect the natural environment and promote environmental sustainability. Mentioned there that we're also looking at our centres in one aspect in relation to ensuring we're mandating employment floor space within our town centres. So there is a true mixed use of development, residential and commercial. And then we're again building on to, our focus on jobs is to ensure that there is sufficient land uses in our industrial areas to ensure that they retain a level of viability. In regard to probably now coming and talking about the topic we are here this evening to talk about, which is the Foreshore Scenic Protection Area, it's just, I think, worth looking at a comparison of what the current controls that apply across the city under the former Hurstville LEP and the Cogra LEP. So both of the LEPs have what is called a foreshore building line. Now, the foreshore building line is that area of land that is located between the high water mark and an area or a line that is on land where it's considered to be that sort of area that can be anywhere between 6 and 20 metres that is very vulnerable in relation to ecology. And in those areas, it's the type of development activity that can occur is very limited. For example, you may see boat houses or boat ramps, but that is about it. Then just looking at on the left-hand side of the slide there on the Hurstville LEP, that also has controls that relate to riparian lands. So that sort of is an ecology, looking at the ecology and applies restrictions to development within a 40-metre area of the river's edge. It also, within the former Hurstville LEP, has an existing foreshore scenic protection area, which I will talk about in a minute. And then in that foreshore scenic protection area, there are some specific controls that currently exist, indicating the minimum lot size or to create a new block of land is 550 square metres. And if you wanted to develop dual occupancy, you'd need 1,000 square metres of land. Now, just looking at the Cogra LEP, so as I indicated, it has controls there for the foreshore building line, so controlling what happens really along that water edge. Now, the Cogra LEP didn't go to the extent of putting controls in for riparian lands, and it didn't have a formal foreshore scenic protection area. However, it did have, it does have what is called a foreshore locality, which is an area that is one block back, more or less generally one block back from the water's edge. And that LEP has introduced or has specific controls for land within that foreshore locality, indicated there that it's 700 square metres if you wish to create a new lot of land, and if you were to build a dual occupancy, it's 1,000 square metres. Okay, so we looked at those controls that were within those former LEPs to really form the basis of how we would proceed with the controls that we would introduce in LEP 2020 along that foreshore area. So the foreshore building line, which I mentioned, that area between just above the high water mark, that foreshore building line has been retained and is across the whole of the LGA. We've taken the control from the former Hurstville area of riparian lands, and we have applied that to the former Cogra LGA as well. So as I indicated, that's approximately an area of 40 metres that occurs from the water's edge. And there's a set of controls that relate to that area. We've also introduced a new control which relates to sea level rise. And this is something that is being applied across a number of councils now across Sydney. And what it does is it identifies the line or the area that is considered the sea level to be at by 2100. We've also, of course, reviewed the foreshore scenic protection area, and we have applied that across the whole of the LGA. And again, I'll talk about how we did that and our approach to that in a minute. Now, also within the LEP, looking at this foreshore area, in particular the foreshore scenic protection area, we've also introduced some specific controls that relate to development. So the first one there being the minimum lot size. So to subdivide a block of land or create a new lot, you need the 700 square metres. So that's it's consistent with what the Cogra area had. We've introduced a new control into the LEP that requires 25% of the site area of land in the foreshore scenic protection area to be landscaped. We've also requiring that if you are to do a development in there, so a significant development, we will be requiring that a design excellence provisions come into play. And then we'll be introducing a minimum subdivision of lot size for a dual occupancy of 430 square metres. To support those provisions, there will be a set of DCP controls or development controls that relate to things such as setbacks, view sharing, and the types of materials that can be used for development along the foreshore area. Now, this slide here it's showing what, so we're here now just in the former Hurstville area. It's indicating what the existing foreshore scenic protection area is. It currently has 4,400 properties in that area. Now, what it is, and I think there is, I guess to indicate and to make it clear, that the foreshore scenic protection area currently is a layer within our LEP that retains and enhances the local character. It's not a control, it's not an environmental control, it's a control that's aimed at protecting, improving the scenic and amenity characteristics of that area, in particular when it's viewed from the water. Okay, so, and as I've mentioned, those controls that currently are in place relate to setbacks, it relates to landscaped area as well. So just moving to how we, as I've indicated, it was felt, the council felt that the foreshore scenic protection area was worth keeping and worth applying to the whole of the LGA. So to assist us in defining where that foreshore scenic protection area, the line would fall or the properties that would be included, we undertook a foreshore review in 2019 that looked at the character of the foreshore, and the character of the foreshore not only from what you see on land, but what it looks like when you look at it from the water. Now, and it may be worth, what I might do is go to the next slide first, and then I'll come back to this one to help you define where and why the line falls, or the areas, the hatched area is identified as how we have done it. Now, the next slide here is what the foreshore review actually did. So you can see the diagram there on the slide has a range of colours. Now, those colours reflect areas that are of high sensitivity in relation to character and those that are lesser sensitive. So what we have used is, what we've used to create the foreshore scenic protection areas, we've used those areas that are considered to be of higher sensitivity. So I'm just going to read those through, and I'll try and link them to the colours so you can get an understanding of what I'm talking about. So we've got bush suburban, which is the area over in Lugano Point there. Then we've got garden suburban larger lots, which is the area that runs up from Gannon's Park. We then have the reserve edge, which is the darker green that runs along the foreshore area around Lugano, around Edith Bay there, up to Gertrude Point. We've got the park edge, which is the magenta colour, which you can see, which is over there in Cogra Bay. We've got the naturalistic edge, which is the dusty, the reddy orangey colour there, which is Oatley Park. sorry, I'm just got my colours wrong there. Then we've got the semi-natural edge, which is the yellow area there along the foreshore. I beg your pardon, it's the naturalistic headland is the Oatley Park, and the naturalistic edge is the darker purple, which you can see edging Cogra Bay and around Blakehurst Cars Park, and they're up around Connors Point. Now, if we now go back to the previous slide, it was those areas of higher sensitivity, which is the areas that we in consultation with the council identified as the foreshore scenic protection for the city. Yes, and while, if we just go to the next slide, while the other areas do have characteristics that are considered key in relation to providing the city and that part of the city with green vegetated area, lovely landscaped area. It was those areas that identified that were considered to be the ones that we would put in the foreshore area, so we could look at the issues around geological features, we could look at vegetation issues, and we would look at and monitor and control the style of housing and materials, which, as I indicated, through that urban design review process. Now, if I just go through what those proposed controls and the amendments that occur within the extended foreshore scenic protection area. Now, it says here that the additional properties in the former Cogra area is 1,600 properties, additional properties that will be put into the area. I might just get clarification on that number because I actually think it's slightly less. I'll just go on and I'll come back to you in a minute. So they're additional properties that we've added to the FSPA moving across the Cogra LGA. Now, the properties that have been removed from the FSPA from the former Hurstville area, say, just clarifying there, it's not 1,600 properties that have been added, it's 1,300 properties that have been added, so thank you. So just in relation to the properties that have come out of the existing FSPA from the former Hurstville area, that's 2,380 properties that have come out. And again, it's because we've just focused the former FSPA, we've revised it based on those the characteristics that have high sensitivities, which I've indicated. We'll also be, as I've mentioned before, introducing a requirement for more landscaping, and that will be in an LEP, so that gives tighter control in relation to assessment, so that will be 25% of the site area. The minimum lot size, so to create a new lot within the foreshore scenic protection area, is 700 square metres. As indicated as well, we'll be asking for major developments, major renovations, new houses and dual occupancy in those areas. In the foreshore scenic protection area, we'll be asking for design excellence, and what that means is the lodgement of a development application. The application would be required to be peer reviewed by an architect, an urban designer identified by council. Then we'll also, as I indicated, there'll be other additional controls that will be put into the foreshore area to help with the protection of the character, both looking from the water and from land, controls that relate to setbacks, materials, and I've also indicated the landscaping as well. Now, I just need to indicate that the foreshore scenic protection area they're not a set of controls that relate to environmental protection. Environmental protection, there are a range of controls that are in place in the LEP, which I've identified relating to the building line, relating to sea level rise, riparian lands, but there are also a range of sort of state and federal provisions that apply to environment within the LGA. So you've got the provisions of the Biodiversity Act, which relates to threatened species. There's a Coastal Management Act. There's a SEP that relates to coastal management, and there's a SEP that relates to vegetation and relating to tree removal. Now, the council also has a tree management policy that came into place in 2019 that has introduced a set of controls that looks at the removal of trees, and when trees are required to be removed, there's a process that looks in relation to replacement, whether it's to replace trees on site or whether there's an offset fee that relates to tree removal. Now, the other issue that a number of you have raised with me before is the issue around biodiversity, and does council have a citywide biodiversity study? Now, we do not have one at this stage, but it is something that we are exploring to do with our environment team. And of course, any recommendations that come out of that biodiversity strategy, which will affect part of this area, will be put into, where appropriate, will be put into a future local environmental plan. Now, just we have, as you're aware, that we've had the LEP on exhibition now since early April, and the input that we've received from the community has been great. So great, and I mean great in a good way, in providing us with feedback about the controls that we've identified, and that is the aim of why we take these LEPs out for consultation. And we've done it, and it's useful because when we put an LEP, we're actually now talking about the detail controls that apply to a city, rather than the strategic directions that we all developed as part of the local strategic planning statement. And so now is the time for you to give us this really detailed feedback. Now, one of the key areas that we have heard is that by reducing the foreshore scenic protection area, so moving the land from the former Hurstville area, will cause overdevelopment by allowing dual occupancy. And I really understand that is a key concern for you. I really understand that. So what we've tried to do here is I just give an indication of what could occur when if the FSPA area is reduced. So it indicates there that it's got, in the former Hurstville area in the FSPA, there's just under, it's 4,400 lots. Now, in that, there of lots that are over 1,000 square metres, there's 549 lots. Okay, so all those lots currently can have a dual occupancy on them. With a revision of the controls, so reduction, then you say within that area, there is 742 lots that are between 650 and 1,000 square metres. So if those lots are removed from the FSPA, they can then, because they've got over 650 square metres, they could be developed with a dual occupancy. So if you look at a comparison of, how many dual occupancies may you get in that area? How many may you get in a year? Now, that is difficult for me to predict. I don't know. But if you look at what type of development occurs across the whole LGA and the type of dual occupancy development applications we get. So if you look at there, we've got across the city, there's 34,500 lots, residential lots. Of that, there's 9,300 that are over the 650 square metres, say. All right, so there's significant 27% of lots there. But when you look at that, well, how many dual occupancies have we received over the last couple of years? So these are actual DA stats we've got in. It might give you an indication of what type of activity may occur down in this area. So in the last 2 years, we've had 105 dual occupancy development applications. Okay, so that equates to 0.56% of the applications that we get, or development activity we get within those 2 years. Now, if I take that and look at that same type of percentage and put it down in looking just in that 742 properties in the former FSPA area of Hurstville, what would that mean each year? So if I take that 0.56%, what it would mean that there would be 3 to 4 developments for dual occupancy that would occur in that area. So that's, and I'm not going to say whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm just letting you know that if you look at historic trends or the trends that occur across the city and you apply that to the area that we're talking about, you anticipate you could get around 3 to 4 developments a year. We did the same type of thing in relation to the former Cogra area, and of course, because they didn't have an FSPA, but they loosened their LEP that came into play in 2017. It's probably, there was a number of dual occupancies that occurred within that foreshore area, and out of that 105, there were probably about 20 applications that have been determined in that area for dual occupancies. But again, I'm not going to say whether they're big numbers, good numbers, bad numbers, but just giving you some idea of what you might expect. Now, the other one is in relation to the infrastructure cannot accommodate more housing. Now, when we were doing the LSPS, that was a key element that came out, that any development, any increase in development that occurred within the city needed to be supported by infrastructure. And that infrastructure was everything from open space to intersection upgrades to things like that. Now, as I indicated in the beginning of this presentation, any sort of development, any LEP or increase in development activity needs to be accompanied by this development control plan. So this LEP there is a development contribution plan that is travelling the journey with it. It's slightly behind because we need to finish the LEP, get the LEP endorsed, and that forms the contribution plans and the schedule of works that needs to occur with it. So we're very conscious that any increase in development or significant increase in development needs to be supported by the appropriate infrastructure. The area there, that some of the areas removed from the existing FSPA have scenic qualities from the river. Why have they been removed? Now, I have just spent some time talking about that. The foreshore review identified a range of characters that moved away from the shore, and a number of meters away from the foreshore area. But it's not just saying that any of those areas have less characteristics. It's just that we focus the FSPA on areas that had the highest level of sensitivity and character. Now, I just would add there that, and of course, the key characteristic that was coming out of the foreshore review was the issue around trees, tree and canopy cover. Now, the LEP introduces a provision there that we haven't had in the LEP that relates to landscaping provisions for any development activity, in particular development activity in residential areas. And of course, we now have the tree management policy, which assists in ensuring that tree replacement and a tree planting program it's funded through an offset fee from the removal of trees can occur. Then, of course, the DCP 2020 will also be looking at, built form, development style, and how that ensures that it enhances and protects the local character. So just on number 4, again, just building on just what I indicated there, reducing the FSPA will result in the loss of trees and vegetation. I'm not sure if I need to iterate what I just said, just about there's a landscaping provision in the LEP, the tree management control is there, but also there's the vegetation SEP, and if there are threatened species on any of the land, that needs to be looked under the Biodiversity Act as well. Also, I've covered this slightly earlier, reducing FSPA will have a negative impact on biodiversity. While, as I've indicated, FSPA, it's a character statement. As I say, it's not an environmental control. I think by introducing the provisions across the whole city relating to riparian land, our program to do a biodiversity strategy, and then our approach to our tree management process, our canopy program, a number of those things there, as well as the state and federal legislation around biodiversity and coastal management, all aimed there to try and assist to protect those key environmental and bioecological issues that run along the foreshore. Number 6 there is our special conditions on sloping sites that struggle to meet the minimum heights. Now, the height restriction within the low density residential areas is 9 metres. Now, there aren't any specific controls that relate to dealing with height on sloping sites. No, that it doesn't happen. What we do try to ensure, and as does when we get a Development Act application in, is to ensure that how the topography of the site works and how maybe earthworks and cut and fill works on the site within reason ensures that that 9 metre height limit is met. You know, it can be difficult to get that 9 metre height limit met within these sloping sites. It can be very difficult, but my team works very closely with the applicants to see if we can ensure that occurs. Number 7 here is, how are the proposed LEP controls enforced? Will non-compliant DAs still be approved? Now, height being one of those often non-compliant areas that occur, especially when the sites can be very difficult. Now, our approach is to ensure that when we get a development application in, it is compliant with the controls, compliant with everything from height to setbacks to floor space ratios. Now, and we work pretty hard to make sure that we get those compliant applications in. However, at times, the controls we have in place and to make them work on a site can be particularly complex. And often those controls may need to be varied to ensure that the development works. But we do try to limit the types of variations and the level of variation that occurs. So if a variation does occur, and let's just say it may be a variation in height because of how the site works, how the site slopes, the applicant needs to justify that variation with a whole range of approaches. It could be through shadow diagrams, it could be through view lines, and it could be just justification that they think they need that height or that variation to make the development work. So it's not something that is just a given, it's something that we ensure the applicant and the assessing officer looks at very closely. Now, the last point here is will the proposed capacity of dual occupancy reduce the need, or increasing dual occupancy in the former Kogarah area, will it reduce the need for higher density dwellings in the Oatley area? Now, I guess dual occupancy is a style of housing so additional dual occupancy and dual occupancy numbers will assist in meeting our housing numbers and our target of 14,000 additional dwellings by 2035. Yes, it will. But its main aim is also it provides some housing choice. It provides a different type of housing. Now, this LEP is not proposing any additional high density development, residential development around Oatley or Oatley Station and the centre, but at this point I can't guarantee that we won't explore additional housing there in the future. I just can't say that. I mean, Oatley is on a railway line, and of course it's, you know, out of sort of integrated land use planning is that additional density and a good transport system go hand in hand. However, I can't indicate when we would explore that, the type of housing we would look at. That's difficult for me to say, but I sort of can't say that we will never look at additional housing down in Oatley because we're amending the foreshore scenic protection area.